Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to the second week of Speaking of Gas. And this is a weekly look at what matters to you, owners of oil and gas rights in Pennsylvania. It's brought to you by the GasWellGuru, educating and advocating for the landowner. The webcast is recorded and may be available on YouTube. Last week's issue is available on YouTube. Okay. So I have some new topics this week, and first I'm going to talk about new permits in the state. I'm also going to talk about a cumulative spud report for the state, what wells have actually begun drilling, and the types of wells drilled in Pennsylvania. Then I'm also going to touch on the rigs that are up, how many and what locations. And then the final thing I'll talk about is missing royalty checks. What if your royalty check stops? What next? So we're going to start with the new permits. And I have some charts to put up. This first one is that I'm sharing. Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's see. I have to say, I sometimes don't title them too well. Permits issued. There we go. There it is. Okay, year to date. So this is from the DEP website. And this shows the wells that were permitted, where permits were issued in 2023. And you see the list of counties, the number of permits, and on this one, I did ask for only unconventional. So we're only talking about the shale wells. And you can see we've got wells in Allegheny, Armstrong, Beaver, Bradford, Butler, Cameron, Clarion, Clearfield, Clinton, Elk, Fayette, Greene, Lycoming, Potter, Sullivan, Susquehanna, Tioga, Washington, Westmoreland, and Wyoming. And there were a total, this is permits issued, total of 548. Actually, one of them was a permit to redrill. And I did not look at that for any more details. That was in Bradford County. So 547 permits for new wells and one for a redrill. And you can see, if I can do this without messing up, Susquehanna County has the most at 91. Then we have Bradford County at 85. Jumping down to Greene at 78, Washington at 63, Westmoreland at 60, and Lycoming would probably be next at 35. So there are a large number of permits being issued. Typically now when they're pulling permits, though, like for instance, the 6 wells in Wyoming County, that may be 6 wells on one pad. It could be more than that, but a lot of times 35 wells in Lycoming County doesn't mean 35 pads, but maybe a few wells per pad. Or, sometimes the number can be very large, so it all depends. So that's what things are looking like in 2023 for the entire state. And then if we probably, as time goes on, we'll maybe just quickly look back at the prior month. And the prior month here is September. And the permits issued were 38. And here's the list of counties. And in this case, Butler comes in with the most at 10. And then Washington County at 8, Westmoreland at 6. And again, these may be just on one pad or, or a couple. And there were none of those redrill permits. These are all unconventional, and they were all new permits. Now, did I actually share that with you? I probably didn't, did I? Well, let me just go back. Okay, here we go. That's the same one. Okay, note to self, label my tabs better. There we go, my month, September. So this is what I just talked about. These were the permits issued in September, and the number was 38. Okay, so now you have permits issued. The next thing is, how many wells did they actually begin? Did they have some activity on in 2023? So this permit, or this chart is a SPUD report from DEP. And so you probably know that spudding a well is beginning the drilling process in some way, whether they're setting the top hole, drilling the vertical, or drilling the entire thing. It's when they broke ground. So the cumulative SPUD report for 2023 shows that, and I did pull conventional and unconventional into this report, and to show you that there is still some conventional drilling going on. I do not know what type all these permits are, or all these wells are, but there was some drilling started. So there were 153 conventional wells, and you notice they are in Clarion, Forest, and McKean County, and Warren County. And there are a couple counties that have both, and that's Clarion and Greene, and that was it. So this is just a new well spud. There's a lot of counties when you get west of Potter County and west where you see large numbers of conventional wells. So the unconventional wells, there were actually 328 spud. And you remember that there were 548 permitted. Not every well that was permitted this year has been spud. And then some of this 328 may be wells that were actually permitted last year. So I do think that what we'll see, and I haven't really proven this, but that more of the wells that are permitted are actually drilled, and probably seeing a smaller percentage of the DUC drilled but uncompleted wells. The last I looked, Tioga County had a record number of those wells, and due to some special circumstances, and that is being cleaned up at this time, plugging and abandoning some of those. So 328 wells in the unconventional spud, a total of 481 wells were actually started last year. Okay. Now the next thing that I'm going to look at is the formations that are being developed in Pennsylvania in the unconventional. And again, I did just look at the formations being drilled in the unconventional, or the shale wells. Shameless plug for Tioga here. Okay, so this is a list of the formations that have been spud in, and they may be in any state of completion in Pennsylvania. Now, a couple of things to note about this. These formations are not listed in the order that they appear in the ground, but rather they're alphabetical. And it was how I pulled them off the list. And then the numbering is just to tell you that I am seeing 33 different formations listed in the DEP report that I pulled. Some other things that I'll say about the formations. For instance, up here at the top of the list, you see the Burkett. And you may not realize this is another shale formation. You don't see it in them developed in all areas, but there are quite a few Burkett wells producing in Pennsylvania. And it's actually part of the Genesee or Geneseo formations. Now, I want to add that I'm not a geologist, although I do look at this stuff a lot. But to the best of my knowledge, the Genesee and the Geneseo may be interchangeable, and the Burkett is a member of those formations. The ones that I highlighted, so there's some duplication there. The ones that I highlighted in green are the ones that we're seeing in the largest number in Pennsylvania. So the Burkett, of course, the Marcellus, at the Point Pleasant, and the Utica. And by far, the Marcellus has the most wells that have been drilled. And then behind that would be the Utica Shale and the Burkett. And the Point Pleasant is actually, it's in between the Utica and the Trenton formation. And so you kind of see both of those in there. There are some differences, not really interchangeable. There's two that I have highlighted that the Onondaga, the reason I highlighted this one is you may have heard about this one. It's not a shale formation. It's a limestone porous formation, but it's the defining formation for the conservation law. So anything above the Onondaga horizon is not subject to the conservation law. Anything below it is. And now, remember, these are not in the order that you would find them in the subsurface. However, the Marcellus is above the Onondaga, and the Point Pleasant and the Utica Shale are below it. So I just wanted to point that out, not necessarily a shale formation that's being produced. The Pleasant Hill that I highlighted, there's one well in the state that I'm aware of that's in the Pleasant Hill. It is different than the Point Pleasant, and it's about 4,000 or 5,000 feet below the Utica Shale. And interestingly, formations can be called different things in different places. And the Pleasant Hill, from what I understand, is the same as the Rogersville Shale, maybe in West Virginia. And so it's another shale. There's only one well, spud in 2017, not actually completed in that formation as far as I can see. So on that note, I'll show you one more thing related to the formations, and that is the actual order that you find those below the surface. So this is a log of formations from a well. Actually, I picked that Pleasant Hill well because it was actually drilled all the way to the Black River. And so this is the order they're in. And this was what this particular company recorded on the log on the completion report for this well. So you see some of those names in there. There's the Burkett, the Tully, Hamilton. There's the Marcellus right above the Onondaga horizon formation. And then when you go below that, upper and lower Tuscarora, there's Tuscarora wells that I'm aware of that were completed in, I want to say, Elk Township, Tioga County. And then we have the Utica and Trenton Black River. And these will always be in the same order. Some of them won't always be present, but they will always be in the same order. So that's a little bit of information about permits that have been issued, what wells have been spud this year. and what formations are being developed and produced in Pennsylvania. And, if you recall, if you listened to last week's broadcast, there's something over 12,000 producing or 11,000 producing wells in the state, and it covers a large number of these formations. Okay. The next thing that I'll talk about is where the rigs are right now in the state. And as of October 4th, and this actually came from the Enverus Rig Report. It's a report that you can subscribe to, and it tells you what counties, and this is all over the country, but I'm just talking about Pennsylvania here. As of October 4th, there was 1 rig in Allegheny County, 2 in Armstrong, 1 in Beaver, 2 in Bradford, 1 in Forest, and the 1 in Forest is a vertical rig, and it's the only one. The rest of these are horizontal. There's 2 rigs up in Greene County, 2 in Lycoming, 1 in Sullivan, 3 in Susquehanna, 2 in Tioga, 2 in Washington, and 3 in Westmoreland County. So there's a total of 22 rigs operating in the state. And back when we were in the rush, I guess as I would call it, the shale gale, whatever, in 2008, 9, 10, and there was a large number of rigs out there. And then when everything crashed, the rig count went down dramatically. And I don't know exactly, but I want to say it was cut down to a third or maybe less of the rigs, the over 1,000 rigs that have been operating across the country. So the rig count never came back to where it was. But the other thing that we see is that the time it takes to drill a well and the productivity from the wells that are drilled, both of those, the time is shorter and the productivity is greater. So it actually takes less rigs to accomplish what they did in the past. And the rig count is probably still, you would still consider it to be low at this time compared to what it was. But we're still producing a tremendous amount of gas here in this play. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, and I don't have any graphs to show you, but this just came up yesterday. And every week the topics are going to change, but hopefully they're going to be timely and relevant to what's happening. And yesterday I had a member of our Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Landowner Alliance call and said, had I ever let's see, that he didn't get his royalty check. And I guess I'll tell that story first. He didn't get his royalty check, so he called the company and asked them why. And it took him, first of all, it took him a long time to reply. And I believe he said that he actually waited several weeks to find out the answer. And the answer was that they had reunitized it and recalculated, and he now owed them money. That he was, the figure that they gave him was around $11,000 behind, or that he owed back because of a change in the unit, a miscalculation that wasn't pinned down. So it took him some time to get the information, and the information he got really didn't answer his question. So he asked me, had I ever run into that? And I'll say, yes. And probably when we ran into that, maybe first, at least in the most egregious form, was when Chesapeake was taking deductions. That it was actually, and I'll use that name on here. I'm not into slamming companies, but that one everybody is certainly aware of. Chesapeake took deductions that exceeded the price and reduced royalty checks to 0 and below. And when they did that, they just stopped the royalty checks. They didn't send an explanation. They didn't send any accounting of it at all. And so that was when I first encountered it. So I just talk about that a little. As a royalty owner, what do you do if your royalty check stops? Well, the first thing that I would do is look at the report. Now, royalty checks are typically 60 days behind, about the same as the reports that are filed with the state. So I'd look to see if that well was actually producing. And this is just me gathering information to know how I would approach the company to ask what the issue is. If it shows that there was no production, then it's possible it was shut in. So that's part of the question is, why was the well shut in? That is a possibility. Wells are shut in from time to time. If one reason is if they are drilling new wells on the pad, sometimes they shut those in. Those are safety reasons. Sometimes there's problems with the wells producing too much water, maybe equipment problems, whatever, that they would shut it in for some period of time. I actually pulled some reports for a client recently that showed that the well seemed to be producing several months a year, maybe 4 or 5 months a year, and then shut off others. And this happened over several years. It also were state leases, and I sort of guessed that they might have just been doing what they needed to do to meet a contract. But in any case, that can happen. And then in this case, they're not sending a check because they're recovering an overpayment. So first of all, the company should provide you the information about why the well is shut in when you ask them that question, or why you didn't get a royalty check. And I believe that if they are adjusting your royalties and recovering back royalties, that they should have to provide you an accounting of that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the check stub bill that was just passed in Pennsylvania. That's one of the ways that we can require companies to meet certain obligations that are fair and reasonable for people who own the private oil and gas rights in the state. We had a check stub bill that was passed this past year, and that's something that our Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Landowner Alliance supported. It was Senator Yaw's bill. And an important thing that we did get on that was that they're required to report the API number on the check. So companies are required to put that on your check. If they're not, then you can call them on that. But we were supporting, we call it a royalty accounting standards since we began as an organization about 2010. And one of the things that we would like to have had in there is that once a well's in production, that the company has to provide you with a report each month, whether or not you're owed royalties. So if the net check is zero because they're adjusting it, you should get an accounting of that. You should be entitled to know what that well actually produced and what they're recovering from you. And I can't imagine any other business where this wouldn't be the case if that sort of adjustment was made. And then also, if the well is shut in, but it's still active, then you should be able to know that on a regular basis as well. So, where does this end up with my answer to this member that called about it? Well, I gave him information about what's typical, what I've seen before, and that this is typical. I know that person's intent was to call his attorney that he deals with on a regular basis to see if there's anything he could do. He also had a clause in his lease that required the company to provide unit declarations and any amendments, and he said that had not been done. And that's another issue that, maybe we'll talk about another week. Unit declarations, should they be required to provide you with those? And they are routinely not providing them. And they routinely also amend them. So it's up to the landowner to just figure all that out. So in the end, where does this get you? I didn't solve the problem for this client, but some of what I do typically with clients is help them understand the expectations about what does happen. And then, I encourage everybody to join our Pennsylvania Oil and Gas Landowner Alliance, because really this is the only way that we can monitor what's happening and maybe affect some legislation that could help tighten the rules a little for how things are reported. We really appreciated the check stub bill that was passed in the House and Senate and enacted. It had other things in it as well. But that's really the result of us working together as an organization. Okay, so that's all I have today, and I managed to stay within that half an hour that I planned for, a little better than I did last week. Thanks for joining me today. The same link will work each Wednesday at noon. And week 1 is available on YouTube. And if you search for Speaking of Gas or GasWellGuru, you'll find it. And I'll just say that I'll determine weekly whether or not the recording will be made available. I will have new topics each week. And I also would welcome suggestions if anyone has topics that they would like to hear about. And please consider joining our Royalty Owners Association. And with that, I did give instructions this week for asking questions, and I don't see any questions in there. Certainly, if you weren't able to do that, provide some feedback to me. But that just must mean that I covered everything completely. So I will stay on a few minutes, and if you have questions, you can type them in the question and answer box, and I'll be happy to attempt to answer them. So thank you for tuning in. And seeing no questions, I am going to end the call. Thanks.